YouTube! Today we're going to cover some of the latest news on the C8 Z06 and we're going to get you up to speed. And then at the end we're going to cover two different subscribers' cars that they sent in some pictures, so I'll cover those as well. If you're new to the channel, every other week right now I'm doing deep dives on the different options and configurations for the C8 Z06 to help you figure out some of the things you should consider and maybe help you decide what options you would pick for your own car. Every other week I also do a news video like this one where I cover kind of the latest news that's happened since the last video. First, there's some pretty big news coming from Rick Corvette Conti about the 2023 model year pricing. In a video that came out earlier this week, Rick shared that Chevy has announced that on March 23rd they're going to release the 2023 Corvette pricing. Now this announcement may raise a few more questions than it actually answers. Chevy's marketing material around the announcement didn't mention anything about the Z06, and in fact the title of the announcement was Model Year 2023 Stingray. I'm optimistic, but we're going to find out here in a couple of days. Now unfortunately there has been some widespread speculation that the C8 Z06 may be delayed on its production start. Nothing official has been announced from Chevy yet. However, as several people have pointed out, the Corvette team themselves aren't yet driving their CTF cars, which usually happens somewhat imminently right before production starts. For those that aren't familiar, CTF cars are captured test fleet cars, and those are used for final testing, tuning, and calibration, generally right before the start of production. They're identical to a production car, except their VIN numbers and their RPO numbers, regular production options, are a little bit different. Usually after testing, these are also sold at auction as a used car. Now, while a lot of people are speculating about what this might mean, I wouldn't read into it too heavily. CTF cars have been spotted as early as last October with the stickers in the window that indicate their status, so I would caution putting too much emphasis on rumors like this because it might not be true, and until Chevy announces otherwise, there's no reason to assume that that's going to be the case. In this case, I'm going to hope for the best. All right, on to the next story. As recently reported by The Drive, some interesting information came out on the LT6 deep dive that happened a couple weeks ago from Chief Engineer Jordan Lee about their procurement process for an engine to compare to the C8 Z06. Per Jordan, back in 2014 when the development process for the C8 Z06 had just started, Chevy was looking to do some comparison among other high-performance engines. Chevy mentioned that they looked at McLaren, Porsche, and obviously Ferrari with the 458 Italia. One thing that hadn't been mentioned previously was how they got their test engine from a Ferrari. Now early in the process, they didn't really want to spend all the money to buy a 458 only to tear it apart so that they could look at the engine. So instead they did what any enterprising college student would do, and they turned to eBay. Apparently they found a 458 Italia engine that had been in a car that was crashed somewhere over in Poland previously. The listing seemed more or less legit, and ultimately they sent over a check for $25,000, crossed their fingers, and hoped that it would show up. Perhaps a little bit to their surprise, it was a legit listing and the engine did end up showing up. It arrived on a pallet right at their main engineering headquarters in Michigan, but for not much money they actually got their hands on a Ferrari F136 motor, which is what powers the 458 Italia. As soon as it arrived, Chevy got right to work, disassembling that motor, pulling it apart so that they could learn some of the secrets on how Ferrari managed everything from oil pressures and cooling management to the bearings to the tight tolerances needed for a flat plane crank high revving V8 motor. While the LT6 is very different than the F136 engine, Chevy did note that they found it really helpful to look through and see how some of the design decisions were made and figure out some of the things that they could do better than Ferrari themselves. It was also really helpful to see how Ferrari approached some of the challenges that the LT6 motor was going to have. You may also recall that once the cars actually began testing, people were seeing Z06 test cars side by side with a Ferrari 458 Italia, and that gives you a good sense that throughout the design and development process, they were definitely comparing the cars, and although the LT6 is a much higher performance engine than the F136, they knew the charisma that the Ferrari has and they really wanted to capture that for the Z06. So I think this was good news all around, and they found a way to save some money when they got the initial engine. Very cool stuff. Alright, so as reported by Corvette Blogger last week, some photos were floating around on Facebook of a number of Z06 test cars in a parking lot. There's nothing particularly remarkable about these cars, however when you looked close, they noticed something interesting. One of the cars was a torch red Z06 with the Z07 package, and it has the carbon fiber wheels from Carbon Revolution. That's not what's interesting. What is interesting though is one of the wheels, when they zoomed in closer, it actually had some curb rash on it. This inevitably shows what's going to happen to a carbon fiber wheel if you pull a little too close to a curb. Now, one of the biggest unanswered questions right now for the Z06 is that all of the pricing, both the cars as well as all the option packages, hasn't been yet announced. And this leads many people to be wondering, what are these carbon fiber wheels going to cost? As I mentioned in an earlier video, the GT500 has wheels made by the same company out of carbon fiber. They're actually smaller smaller and a little bit less complicated to make, and the option for those wheels is $18,500. That leads me to think that on the Z06, these carbon fiber wheels are going to be a pretty expensive option. You could be looking at up to $5,000 per wheel. Now, with a curbed wheel, one of the downsides to carbon fiber is there isn't really a way to replace it. Due to the way that carbon fiber is layered and manufactured, it's all one giant piece, and there isn't a good way to intersperse something within those layers to repair or patch or fix otherwise these wheels. Now, you may be thinking that the clear coat on top of the carbon fiber may be something that you could reapply if you just got a very small surface scratch, but keep in mind that Chevy has said that the clear coat that is on these wheels is specifically designed for these wheels and to avoid UV degradation that could happen if the car is outside in sunlight. Now, the problem there being you may not be able to get that same clear coat compound that would protect the wheels, and so if you tried to repair the clear coat, you wouldn't necessarily get the same wear over time that you would have on the wheel, and ultimately it might actually highlight where you had damage previously. Now, while these wheels certainly look cool and will add performance through lightness, hat tip to Colin Chapman, the reality of driving a car like this means that there is going to be that risk over time. And it could be a pretty expensive mistake for a momentary lapse in awareness while you're driving. Now, to me, one of the other problems that comes to mind about this is that most of the wheels and tires spec'd for the C8 Z06 with the Z07 package are likely to mostly, if not completely, be spoken for by the early production of the car. We all know there's such huge demand for the car, and I don't know how much Chevy is going to allocate additional resources to building parts to fix broken cars when they haven't even fulfilled many of the orders yet for the car. This could mean that if you damage the wheels early on, you may go a long time without being able to get a replacement. Hopefully that's not true, but that is something that I would be a little bit concerned about. This could mean that parts inventory is fairly delayed for months, maybe even the first couple years of production, given the pent-up demand for the car. One other interesting thing I noticed about this is that Carbon Revolution actually just passed an internal milestone. Just in the past week, they announced that they had built their 50,000th carbon fiber wheel. Incidentally, it was for a C8 Z06. The point here is that if you divide 50,000 by 4, assuming that most of the time they're building a set of 4 for any car, this only gives you about 12,500 cars that you would have built wheels for. Now, considering the high demand and the long reservation list for the car, this means that they're going to have a lot of wheels to make. And although production has already started, they're probably going to be working around the clock for years to come for all the people that are going to want these wheels. Now, lastly, while we're on the subject of wheels, next week is going to be my second deep dive video into the options for the C8 Z06. And specifically, we're going to be talking all about wheels. So stick around, I think you'll enjoy it. Next, I wanted to mention some older news that a couple subscribers had asked me about. I did some digging and I got an answer. Direct from Alex McDonald, who's the vehicle performance manager at Chevy, the C8 Z06 is not going to have cylinder deactivation or auto stop start. I wanted to mention it because both of these features are one of those blink and you'll miss it things that's been in some of the information released, and so I wanted to make sure to call it out directly. Auto stop start is a feature that a lot of people aren't a real big fan of, and then specifically cylinder deactivation has been something that's been causing some problems on older generation cars, and so it's good news to hear that that's not even going to be on the car. Alright, so I also wanted to share a couple viewers' rides. First up is subscriber Vinny, who sent me a picture of 2 different Corvettes that he's had. The first is a beautiful 2009 C6 in Victory Red. He said that he absolutely loved the color of that car, and I'm inclined to agree. It's beautiful. And then more recently, a 2016 Z06 that he bought from McMulkin and also really enjoyed. Beautiful cars both. Thank you for sending those in. And then next is a manual C7 Stingray sent in by subscriber Nitish. Nitish seems to have a great eye for photography with a mural of Muhammad Ali in the background, and I gotta tell you, the car looks pretty classy in that black. Beautiful pictures, so thank you for sending those in. If you're interested to see your own car on my channel, feel free to send an email to fredsfullthrottle@gmail.com. Put the subject of my car, and ideally include 1 or 2 pictures, at least one of those with you with the car if possible. And over time, I'll be mixing these into some of my videos. So join me next week where I do the deep dive on the wheels for the C8 Z06, and I'm going to talk about as many different aspects and options as available, share my impression, and even give you some insight into what I'm going to do for my car. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, Fred out!